somewhere waiting for me. My lover stands on golden sand and watches the ships.
Are video games art? It depends on who you ask, and if you ask me, it depends on the game. Or, more specifically, it depends on the developers. I find more often than not, when you play a game, you can tell if the creators were artists who love the game, or not. I think that ultimately there are two kinds of games. Games made for players, and games made for profit. And I'd say that ultimately what separates the games that are considered art. Because I wouldn't consider all games to be art. Whether the developers were artists or marketers is pretty easy to see in a game. You've played a game like that before. The kind of game where one of the first things you see is a pop-up ad. The kind of game that releases unfinished, but somehow the online store works perfectly fine. I remember when I was growing up as a young kid in America, whenever I got done dodging all the gunfire on the way home from school, most of what I did was play video games. And I remember games like these being pretty rare. Halo still had its merit, Fallout was pretty much at the top of its game, hell, even Call of Duty had yet to include loot boxes when I started playing. Because of this, I've had the twisted experience of watching these soulless, money-grubbing marketplaces disguised as games become the norm for the industry. It feels like every game that comes out is either unfinished or predatorily monetized. And some of the real go-getters decide to do both. With a few exceptions like Elden Ring and Baldur's Gate 3, it seems like the industry is driven more by profit than passion. It makes it kind of bittersweet to remember what gaming used to be. Bitter because of how far it has fallen, but sweet because it allows me to appreciate what was in retrospect. And when I think back to artistic and passionate games of my childhood, there's always one that comes to mind instantly.
What is the difference between a man and a parasite? A man builds, a parasite asks, "Where's my share?" A man creates, a parasite says, "What will the neighbors think?" A man invents, a parasite says, "Watch out, or you might tread on the toes of God."
Bioshock was developed by Irrational Games and released in 2007. It was one of the first shooters I ever played. Not the first, mind you, because my real first shooter was Lost Planet, closely followed by Halo, but Bioshock was close to the beginning. As a consequence of this, the bar for FPS games was higher than most Los Angeles residents. There are a lot of things Bioshock fumbled, don't get me wrong. For one, the Vita Chambers. So, essentially, when you die in Bioshock, your progress doesn't reset. You respawn with the same stuff you had when you died, and your enemies stay the same too. It's probably one of the biggest issues I have with the game, because when you run out of medkits or Eve hypos, you just kind of have to brute force wherever you died repeatedly. Granted, there are some occasions when the Vita Chamber system works in your favor. If you take on a Big Daddy and get it to barely any health, but you die just because you weren't watching your health and not because you ran out of medkits, you can walk right back in full health and ruin his day in 1 or 2 shots before he can even respond. That said, the cons outweigh the pros with the Vita Chambers, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Bioshock starts with your character on a plane saying this.
They told me, "Son, you're special. You were born to do great things." You know what? They were right.
Your character's name is Jack, which isn't really relevant because this is the only dialogue he has for the entire game. I can't really tell why the devs gave him any lines at all if he was meant to be a silent protagonist. Maybe they were just trying to fake the player out. Regardless, since the plane crashes in the middle of the ocean, and you swim out of the wreckage. The only thing you see other than the burning remains is a lone lighthouse, so you go to it. Inside, you see this. No gods or kings, only men. Now, I could try to explain the philosophy behind this, but I think Andrew Ryan does a much better job.
I am Andrew Ryan, and I'm here to ask you a question. Is a man not entitled to the sweat of his brow? No, says the man in Washington, it belongs to the poor. No, says the man in the Vatican, it belongs to God. No, says the man in Moscow, it belongs to everyone. I rejected those answers. Instead, I chose something different. I chose the impossible. I chose rapture. A city where the artist would not fear the censor, where the scientist would not be bound by petty morality, where the great would not be constrained by the small. And with the sweat of your brow, rapture can become your city as well.
This is our introduction to Andrew Ryan, the founder of the underwater city of Rapture. Before I dive into the nitty-gritty of the themes here, let's take a moment to appreciate how amazing Rapture looks from an artistic standpoint. It's kind of hard to describe why, but there's just no other location in video games, or just in general, that looks like this. Ryan built this place as a haven for objectivists. If you don't know what an objectivist is, it's essentially a person who believes in only living for themselves and doing what's in their best interests over others. The purpose of one's life is the pursuit of one's own happiness, or something along those lines. Basically, it's everyone for themselves in Rapture. Obviously, to a rich businessman like Andrew Ryan, this is very appealing. No taxes, no labor laws or unions, no governance of any kind, really. Ideally, this means that everyone has the freedom to create their own destiny, and through hard work and perseverance, they can all live the lives they want to live. It actually doesn't sound that bad on paper. That is, if you live in fucking La La Land, because anyone with at least a semi-functioning brain would probably be able to tell you why this is a bad idea. Letting people run wild and do whatever they want will eventually turn into a sort of eater be eaten, killer be killed situation. And over the course of the game, as we're about to see, this is exactly what happened in Rapture. As soon as you arrive, you are immediately contacted by a man calling himself Atlas. He tells you that he and his family are trying to escape Rapture, and he needs your help to rescue them. You follow his instructions and inject yourself with Adam, the substance that destroyed Rapture. Adam essentially allows whoever uses it to alter their genetic code, granting them superhuman abilities. In the context of Bioshock's gameplay, it allows you to utilize plasmids. You acquire different plasmids as you go through the game, each with different uses, and you can also get upgraded versions of them later on. I have a couple of issues with this system that I will touch on in this video, but I'll save them for later since they don't really apply until the latter half of the game. Bioshock's basic combat system is pretty simple. You hit an enemy with whichever plasmid is best for your situation, then use whatever gun is most effective. Repeat until your heart is the only one still beating. Later in the game, you also unlock things like additional ammo types, with anti-personnel rounds being good against, personnel, like splicers, and armor-piercing rounds being great against turrets and drones. Now, I'll be honest with you, this game is pretty old, and even though the gameplay loop itself is sound and undoubtedly good for its time, it feels about as smooth as wiping your ass with sandpaper. That said, while Bioshock undoubtedly shows its age, most of the game has aged remarkably well despite this. I still think the combat is really good, even if it's got an asterisk attached to it. You make your way through Neptune's bounty, picking up plasmids, kicking names, taking ass, the whole shebang. You then run into this. The Big Daddies and the Little Sisters are a prominent part of Rapture's story, as well as the gameplay. So, you know how I mentioned that Adam makes you stronger? Well, it also turns out it's addictive. Like heroin levels of addictive. Adam is produced by a specific type of sea slug found at the bottom of the ocean, which is how they made their way into Rapture in the first place. A large organization in Rapture, called Fontaine Futuristics, also discovered that the slugs make more Adam when they are inside of a little girl. I don't want to know, but hence the Little Sisters. The Big Daddies are simply there to protect the Little Sisters from being, taken by the Adam-addicted citizens of Rapture. They add a lot to the story and most definitely add to the atmosphere, especially with how imposing the Big Daddies are. You corner one of these Little Sisters and you meet Dr. Tenenbaum, the creator of the Little Sisters. She implores you to save the Little Sisters by curing them, promising to make it worth their while. And Atlas encourages you to kill the sister to harvest her atom, which you use to get genetic upgrades. Now, this is a cool concept. The decision on whether to prioritize yourself or some random girl ties in well with Bioshock's criticism of objectivism. You can either embrace that objectivism and morally fall as Rapture did, or you can do the right thing and save them. In theory, this mechanic not only ties in well with Rapture's story, but can also serve as a difficult point of introspection for the player, making you question how morally sound you really are. However, the entire point of this mechanic, at least narratively, is completely and utterly rendered moot by one fatal flaw. You don't need Adam to succeed, and once you save a few of them, Tenenbaum sends you a little package containing a shitload of the stuff. So you see, this choice is made meaningless, which actually kind of ties in nicely with something that happens later in the game, but still. Not only is the choice essentially fake, but there's also the fact that the upgrades that Adam gives you just aren't necessary to make it through the game. The only ones I consistently grab are flat health and Eve upgrades, and maybe an extra plasmid slot or two if I'm feeling spicy. This mechanic, which should be the backbone of the entire game, both narratively and mechanically, is a failure. Following the instructions of Atlas, you make your way to his family. Unfortunately, Andrew Ryan has other plans, so Atlas's family gets an explosive reunion. After this, you head to Arcadia, one of the prettiest levels in the game, which is saying something. Atlas, after watching his family get destroyed with Andrew Ryan's facts and logic,
let's say hypothetically that I just killed a man,
tells you to kill him. At this point, Andrew Ryan sees you as a threat, and he's out for blood. Soon after you enter Arcadia, Ryan decides that the plants are communists and releases an airborne agent into Arcadia to kill all of them off. Atlas informs you that with no trees, there would be no oxygen. You know, you are at the bottom of the ocean, boyo. So you have to create a dispersing agent to counteract the gas. Ryan kills Langford, the woman who was helping you through the level, and her dying message allows you to access her safe, which allows you to invent the Lazarus vector. This introduces the player to the crafting system, or the invent system, which overall is pretty good, albeit unnecessary. You just kind of pick up crafting materials as you go, so it isn't a pain in the ass, and later on it becomes a reliable source of alternate ammunition, which is convenient. It also allows you to craft things like automatic hack tools, which... hold on. Let me talk about the hacking system. I don't fucking like it! You can shock machines like turrets and drones and then initiate a hack on them to make them friendly. There are also things like safes that you can hack that contain loot. However, failing a hack can kill you. You either just receive flat damage, and not a small amount of damage either, or the clap of your ass cheeks alerts the drones, and the fucking boys show up to stomp your ass into the ground. Also, every hack in the game is either stupid easy or harder than a Discord mod playing Final Fantasy XIV. And what you get out of it is never really anything that great. It's a high-risk, low-reward system, but it also makes the game just convenient enough to make it feel more necessary than it really is. As a result of this, I always feel like I need to use the crafting materials I have on automatic hack tools, which makes the system feel less diverse. At this point in the game, you will also have encountered weapon upgrade stations. It's as simple as it sounds. Each station can upgrade a single weapon once, and each weapon has a couple upgrades, one of which is generally a straight damage increase. This system, while incredibly simple, works pretty well. It creates a nice sense of progression, and is one of the few light RPG elements in the game that doesn't have any irritating downsides. It also makes your guns look cooler. As you're going through the game, you can also pick up these audio logs, which add in additional depth and perspective to the fall of Rapture. I like this a lot. They are completely optional to listen to, and I'd be lying if I said I listened to every single one, but it does create some memorable moments, like hearing Tenenbaum talk about her research as a big daddy walks past, or hearing the suffering of a couple whose daughter had been made into a little sister.
We saw our Masha today. We barely recognize her. That's her, Sam said. You're crazy, I told him. That thing? That is our Masha? But he was right. She was drawing blood out of a corpse by Fontaine Fisheries. And then when she was done, she walked off hand in hand with one of those awful golems.
These logs help to add to the already incredible atmosphere by giving you context, and now you walk through these ruins knowing that every area has its story, its own little private tragedy. While on your way to turn Andrew Ryan into a red paste, you are stopped in Fort Frolic by Sander Cohen. Cohen is a self-obsessed artist who essentially has you at his mercy. He tells you he'll let you go if you complete a task for him, which is to kill his former students, taking their pictures and putting them into his latest and greatest piece of art, his quad tick. This level is pretty great, with Sander Cohen being one of the more memorable side characters from the game. You might think this sounds way too fetch questy, and don't worry, that will come up later. Despite how much I like this level, this was also where I first started to hit a few walls. For one, the Vita Chamber system was really starting to grind my gears, because the game was getting harder, which meant I would burn through my resources much faster. As a result, I started doing less and less of the big daddy fights because more often than not, it just wasn't worth the ammo, even medkits. Secondly, and this might just be a personal thing, I almost never swapped plasmids throughout the game. I just used electric shock, incinerate, and telekinesis, and that's really it. And the only reason I even used incinerate was to get through frozen doors. Even at this point in the game, the combat wasn't diverse or difficult enough to make me want to use all the plasmids I had, which only further exacerbated the issue of not wanting to fight the big daddies and rescue the little sisters because I was finding fewer and fewer reasons to acquire more Atom. Like I said, this very well could be a personal thing for me. Maybe other people used all their plasmids, I don't know. It could just be a me problem. But so is a methamphetamine addiction, and just because it's personal doesn't mean it's not a problem. Once you finish all Cohen's students, no, not like that, wrong game, he lets you go. You don't even have to kill him. In the end, he just wanted your help. You gave it to him, and he kept his word. He even apologizes for losing his temper and attacking you earlier in the level. He may be insane, but at least he's not a liar. In a mentally deranged fashion, you do your business and you go your separate ways. In order to get to Ryan, you'll have to do some technological fuckery to get to the core, going around collecting parts to make an EMP device just to open Andrew Ryan's front door. As you do, he tries to destroy your spirit with his facts and logic.
Let's say, hypothetically, that party rock is in the house tonight.
When you finally do get through, he's fucking golfing. You were fighting tooth and nail through a bunch of goons in the core of Rapture to get your hands around his billionaire neck, and he's just playing putt-putt. Then, this happens.
Stop, would you kindly? Would you kindly? Powerful phrase. Familiar phrase.
Would you kindly? Would you kindly get this? Would you kindly find that? Would you kindly find that? Would you kindly find it? Would you kindly get this? Would you kindly head to Ryan's office and kill the son of a bitch?
Sit, would you kindly? Stand, would you kindly? Run! Stop! Turn. A man chooses. A slave obeys. Kill! A man chooses. A slave obeys. Obey!
Aside from being one of the best twists ever, this is a few things. On one hand, it is the narrative reason for all of your actions up to this point. Atlas, or more accurately, Fontaine, genetically engineered you to do his bidding whenever he uses the phrase, "would you kindly?" If at any point you asked yourself, why the fuck would my character want to do this shit? Cause I mean, come on. It also serves to make an excellent point. The fact that player choice in games is an illusion. No matter what the player thinks of the environment, all the choices are completely meaningless, and all of the answers are ones approved by the developers. If and when I talk about Bioshock Infinite, I'll probably go deeper into this because they make a similar statement there. This is one of the reasons I'm kind of alright with the little sister choice being pointless, because it does tie in nicely to reinforce this point. Whether that was intentional or not, I have no idea, but it still helps in my headcanon. With Andrew Ryan out of the way, Fontaine is able to take control of Rapture. With no more use for you, he tries to dispose of you, but the Little Sisters lead you to safety. You speak to Tenenbaum, who tells you that she was able to undo some of Fontaine's control, but you'll need to find more cures if you want to truly be free. Tenenbaum is an interesting character because most of the people in Rapture are out to just make as much as they can for themselves. And while you'd initially assume that's the same of Tenenbaum, since, she created the Little Sisters, but she seems to be genuinely remorseful for what she's done. She gives you the means to save them in the first place, and her ultimate goal is to free them from the hell that is Rapture. She's a rare character in Bioshock, a redeeming one. A character trying to escape from the tragedy of Rapture, much like you, albeit for different reasons. I'll be honest, everything after the twist reveal isn't very good. It's not abhorrent by any means, but the quality of the levels definitely goes down for the last stretch of the game. You chase Fontaine, curing yourself as you go. There are some interesting ideas mechanically that tie in with Fontaine's remaining control of you, like taking down your maximum HP, or forcing you to only use randomly chosen plasmids periodically. These are cool switch-ups to the gameplay, but the last couple levels are still pretty underwhelming compared to the excellence that came before the twist. After all this, you finally get to fight Fontaine, and the fight is pretty bad. To be fair, all the boss fights in Bioshock kinda suck, unless you include the big daddies. All of them are essentially just regular enemies with guns and a larger amount of health, and if you have a friendly drone with you, the boss won't even think about attacking you. At least Fontaine looks kinda cool, I guess. He has a couple phases, each with different elemental effects on his attacks. After you drain a health bar in a phase, he just is back in shackles. You couldn't have animated him like dropping to one knee, falling over, anything. He just magically appears right where he was before. It's a nitpick, but it's such a weird decision, it kind of baffles me. You drain the atom from his body, and then the Little Sisters show up and essentially maul him to death. Then you're done. I do like the ending, the good ending. It doesn't feel as impactful, what with the failure of the Little Sister mechanic and all, but it's still an ending that I appreciate, and it does carry some emotional weight to it. Bioshock is not a perfect game. I believe that in this video alone, I've already detailed many of my issues with it. The plasmids lose their utility. The hacking system is annoying. There aren't enough anime girls. I have plenty of problems with this game, but ultimately I still love it, and it's still in my top 10 favorite games of all time. And it is most definitely a game that I would consider art. Passion Irrational had for their game is oozing from every part of it. The music, the unique colors and setting, the characters, the enemies. Bioshock is a game that feels loved. It really feels like the developers were truly ambitious and sought to create something truly great. And while this studio would end up flying too close to the sun, which I'll discuss more when this series gets to Bioshock Infinite, it's undoubtedly a type of boldness that should be celebrated and respected, despite the game's many problems. It may bother some how much I seemingly shit on Bioshock in this video, but if there's anything I want you to take away from this video, it's that Bioshock is true art, made by true artists with vision and ambition. I want you to take away that this is a game that has my undying respect for how bold and passionate it was willing to be. Ultimately, Bioshock would go on to be one of the most influential shooters ever, basically. And while some of that influence has turned sour, it's a good thing Bioshock was made, and the video game industry is better for it. A game with something to say is, unfortunately, a dying breed. Most games nowadays hardly say anything at all other than consume product, and they certainly aren't willing to criticize. Bioshock dared to do that. And while saying that objectivism has a lot of problems isn't exactly a hot take, it's still a bold choice to center a game around the critique of a way of thinking. I also love how, despite the story being so excellent, the focus on telling a story is with the gameplay. I love that Bioshock, like many of my favorite games, understands what a video game is supposed to be. Ken Levine, I genuinely have no clue how to pronounce it, the game director for Bioshock, did an interview with Rock Paper Shotgun around Bioshock's release. To quote his answer to how he conceived of Rapture, "I don't start with story because games are not story. Games are gameplay. Games are interactive. I had this notion of an underwater city. From that, I thought if we wanted to make a game that was scary, it has to be believable. So why on earth would there be an underwater city? From that, I wondered what sort of utopia it would be, and came up with the character Andrew Ryan. He'd be terrified of the new dealers in the US, and the Stalinists in Russia would find his city, so, as he said, it wasn't impossible to build a city at the bottom of the sea. It was impossible to build it anywhere else." What makes Rapture and its downfall so compelling is that the focus was on the gameplay the whole time. The team at Irrational wanted the gameplay to tell the story. The focus is how we got the wonderful environments you can observe for yourself, and the logs you can opt to listen into, and even the light RPG mechanics like the plasmids. Bioshock's focus on gameplay above all else, in turn, made the storytelling feel so much more impactful, and is the reason for Bioshock's unforgettable atmosphere. Everything in Bioshock feels so intentional, like all of it was included for a reason, and all of it adds to the environment and the story in the same way. They all also tie back to Bioshock's criticism of objectivist ideals, and even if they executed this imperfectly, they tried, which is more than I can say for most other games. And despite its many imperfections, Bioshock will always be remembered as one of the greatest, most ambitious, and most artistic games ever made. This video is the first part of a 3-part series I'm making on the Bioshock games. So it follows that the next part will be Bioshock 2, and then the last part will be Infinite, along with a sort of conclusive look back on the series as a whole. It serves as a nice big project for me to really get absorbed into, and it also gives me a nice reason to play through all the Bioshock games again. The Bioshock 2 video is already in the works, but until then, this is farewell. And when that video rolls around, would you kindly return?